Hello, Learn 11 class. Welcome back to video 2 of the learning strategy, test strategies video lectures. This is the final video of the series. You should have watched video 1 already, as well as the TED Talk on power poses. Following this video, there will be a video on going over one of the exam questions, and that will be in the same place as your final test. So if it's not next to this one, wherever your final test is, that video will accompany it. Okay, sorry about that. Here we go. So this, what you'll need for this video is something to take notes with, a pencil, a pen, and some paper. Let me just take a drink here. Okay, my throat got dry. Okay, so some of the things to keep. Oh, I'm sorry. So this video is going to go over preparing for timed essay exams and the reason why it's important to know some of this information, okay? Because there will be essay exams in some of your futures. So it's good just to get the notes down and to be exposed to that moving forward. Okay, so the first thing here is that whenever you're given an essay exam test, you are being tested. Even if you're only writing an essay for a course and it's not timed, that essay is a form of a test. And the way that you're being tested is you're being tested on your organization of ideas and the clarity that you write with when using specific examples and evidence. Okay, so those are the two places or the two ways that you're being tested. You can prepare for a test like this by looking at all the terminology and the major concepts that you've learned for the course and start linking them and finding the relationships between them. And know those relationships well, because once you know the relationships well, you can explain those relationships and you can explain the terms in a much more in a context and with much more detail. You can go through, if you're not given prompts, you can go through all of your terms and concepts and everything you've learned for the semester and create possible exam questions for yourself, and in response, create some outlines. Or you can go ahead and fully answer those questions as if they were essays. Further practice from there is to actually practice the essays, is to go ahead and write out the essays. Time yourself. Set a timer and go through all of the steps, pre-writing or brainstorming, writing the actual response, and then revising and editing your response, and see how long it takes. Let's say that you are practicing for an essay and you set the timer and it took you an hour. And you don't want to take an hour. You know you only have 45 minutes, so you have to shave off 15 minutes of your writing time. So what you do is you set the timer again, now that you know how long it takes you, and you shave off maybe 5 minutes. And you see how far you get with that. And then you look at how long it took you to pre-write, to write, to revise and edit, and you can time those as well. And then you start shaving off where you spent the bulk of your time, or you redistribute the amount of time. Okay, so it's really just writing over and over and over again and timing yourself as you're doing it, using different strategies and looking for where you spend most of your time. And you have to do it a few times to really learn this about yourself. It can't just be done in one go. Another way that will help you prepare and will also help you answer more quickly is to know the kind of question that's being asked of you. In English class, if any of you have taken English class, you'll learn about the different forms of responding, the different forms of essays. Some are argumentative, some compare and contrast, some are narrative, and a narrative is personal. It's an essay that's based on some kind of experience that the writer has had. Knowing this is going to already give you some ideas for how to respond to a prompt. Okay, so if you need to know more about that, the Writing and Reading Center at LAC, or visiting an English tutor or instructor at the Multidisciplinary Student Success Center at PCC is a way to prepare, is to get these answers. They know this stuff, so they can help you with it. So one of the reasons why timed writing is really important and why I like to go over it is because the Cal State system, when I was in college, required every student who was earning a degree to take a timed writing exam in order to get their degree. They had to have proficient writing skills in order to get their degree. At the time, a timed writing exam was the best way for them to assess that. Since then, there have been many new options, but I don't know what the guidelines are for that. If you are writing, if you're doing an assessment once you transfer to the college you're going to, you will most likely be timed for that. If you go on to grad school and you take the GREs, there's a timed writing exam for that. The CBEST, if you're going to be a teacher. So there are several different, timed, standardized testing that involves writing. And so we're going to go over some of those steps on how, what can you follow, what formula can you follow as you're writing, but this is all in preparation for the writing. If you want to know more about where you can practice these prompts or see some examples, you can always Google SAT prompts, or you can go to the CSULB Writers Resource Lab, which is, let's see, I'm going to show you this. Let's see if it'll let me go there. Nope, this is the SAT one. Oh, dang, I have to move this. Okay, here we go. So, I'm not sure if you can see this because this, yeah, okay, good. Looks like you can. So if you see here, these are all different topics. Look at how many there are. So many. These are topics that have been used in the past. Okay, so, we'll look at male bashing. Ooh, question on that, huh? So what comes up is this, okay? The questions here, it tells you how to respond to it, how long you have, 75 minutes. And so you can take a look at those. Those are actual WPE prompts for Cal State Long Beach. And again, even if you print this out and you write it and you time it for yourself, you can go to the Writing and Reading Center, the Writing and Reading Success Center at LAC, or see a writing tutor at PCC. And they will go over your responses with you and help you through that. That is a fantastic way to prepare, okay? Now, the next thing here is to know what your specific challenges in terms of writing. You do not want to have a long list of challenges. You may have a long list of challenges. I'm not saying that that's not true. But when you're focusing on timed writing, you want to narrow down what it is that you need to focus on and what your challenges are. You have to let go of all of the challenges and focus on one main challenge or two main challenges just to get you through the timed writing portion. I'm going to talk more about this when we get to editing and revising. When you sit down to write an essay exam, it's good to, first of all, preview the prompt, read the prompt and the guidelines very closely, and make any annotations that are necessary. Sometimes essay prompt questions will be asking you 3 questions, but they don't have question marks, and it looks like one giant question. So you want to, take apart the question and look to see how many are actually being asked of you, even if they don't have question marks. Once you've done that, then you can start to look at the clock and start planning. All we've talked about in Learn 11 is planning, and also not biting off more than we can chew. Starting small and practicing. And then once we have the hang of that, we add something else in. Okay, so in preparation for the exam, we've sat down and we haven't started to write yet. What we're going to do is make a time management plan. If I have 60 minutes to write a response, 10% of that time, and that 50% should say 40% next to write. I really apologize. The math is wrong there. If I have 10% of my time to brainstorm, that means I have 6 minutes out of 60 minutes to come up with an idea, to write a loose outline and a plan for what I'm going to write. And then I have 12 minutes to come up with a thesis statement or a claim. We're going to go over thesis statements and claims on the next slide. Or in one of these coming slides, so don't worry too much about that. But they do take quite a while to write, and we always want to return to them at the end after we're done writing, just to make sure we've put everything into the thesis statement that we need in there. And then we go to writing, and writing should say 40%. And if you notice, that 40% is so close to the 30% of revise and editing and 20% of thesis. This is because the writing portion does not make up 80 or 90% of your score. Your score has something to do with all of these different parts. If you don't have an organized essay, so you didn't brainstorm and create, an outline for how you're going to respond, and it becomes disorganized, you're going to lose points. If you don't have a point or an argument, something that you're focusing on, a focal point in this essay, you're going to lose a lot of points. If you haven't written anything, of course, you're going to lose points. But if you haven't revised or edited any of your essay, and it's all grammatically incorrect and it's difficult to read, you're also not going to get a high enough score to pass. So think about these as all being very important. And so you don't want to spend 80% of your time just writing, okay? So it takes practice to get this down, and that's why I said practicing with those prompts is a good exercise. During the pre-writing phase, before you even start writing, just when you're brainstorming, you want to create that outline. And what that outline does for your instructor is that your instructor can see the outline of your ideas. So let's say for whatever reason you didn't perform well, that you had these ideas and they were structured and you can show the outline for it. But once you sat down to write it, you sort of lost the plot. The outline is incredibly helpful for the instructor to see what you had intended and what you were planning to create and respond to. A thesis or a claim, it's also called a claim, is a statement, or it's an argumentative statement in that it's a complicated statement. It needs evidence for it to be proven. Okay, so a couple of other facts here about a thesis statement is that they, at least throughout undergrad, when we're writing papers, a thesis goes at the end of the introduction paragraph, and that's just easy to find for any reader to know what your point is. but also it helps set up for the rest of the essay. The thesis is specific and argumentative. Now, I want to clarify this. If you're writing a narrative essay, which you will be doing for this next test, a narrative essay is from the first person's perspective. Can you think of a narrative essay that you've written in the past? Well, if you've ever had to write an essay going over the most interesting part of your summer when you returned back to school in high school, you wrote a narrative essay. Sorry, someone is yelling outside. Well, how then do you create an argument out of something that's personal? For instance, let's say your thesis statement, or let's say that the most interesting thing you did last summer was to you helped garden around the city library. You volunteered to garden with the Gardening Society of Long Beach around the city library. Well, if you put that in a thesis statement and said, the most interesting part of my summer was, and you put that in there, how is that an argument? So argument doesn't always mean that it's debatable. If it's a fact, it happened for you, no one can argue that it didn't. However, what you are arguing is that it was the most interesting. Okay, that's the argument. So you need to use evidence to support what was so interesting about that activity or that experience. So just keep in mind that when we say argumentative, it doesn't always mean debatable. Sometimes it does. A thesis statement is never a question or a fact. You're being asked a question, and a thesis statement is answering the question. So you don't want to respond to a question with another question, at least not for timed writing, not in an essay. And a thesis statement will encompass all of the different points that you're making in the essay. So it's not leaving anything out. Thesis statements tend to be one sentence as well, unless your essay is very long. So I say if it's 10 pages or more, you could have 2 sentences. If it's under 10 pages, 1 sentence will do. And it's part of a skill to try and get everything that you're writing about in an essay into 1 sentence anyway. So that's part of what you're learning when you're writing a thesis statement. And then, of course, creating an outline helps you to organize your ideas and to start to plan on how you will support your thesis and your argument with evidence. Please write according to plan. Don't stop halfway through and change your argument or just totally go the opposite way like I did. I actually did that when I went to Cal State Long Beach, and I had to write, I had to do the writing proficiency exam just like every other student. As an undergrad, I was an English major, and I worked in the Writers Resource Lab, and I had to have a minimum, I think, of like 13 points to pass. And the way that they grade these writing proficiency exams is that a 10 is the lowest score to pass, and the highest, I believe, was like a 15 or 16. And I needed a 13 in order to work at the tutoring center that I was at, the Success Center. And I got an 11. I barely passed. And my bosses at the writing center had to sit me down and ask me all about, what happened. And I really didn't know what happened. But then when we sat down and talked about it, they helped me to see that halfway through, I was asked, the question that I was asked to write on was, are grades a clear indicator of student success and whether or not they understand what they're learning? And at first I said yes, and I started writing my essay. I got halfway through and I realized not always grades are, often a grade's just a grade, and it's based on the teacher's, an A to one teacher is not an A to another teacher. And, I started to get really confused. And so I crossed everything out and I started to argue against myself. And I lost a lot of time because of that. And it was really jumbled because I hadn't thought out fully what this new response was going to sound like and how I was going to support it. And it was a much more difficult way of answering. And had I just stuck with the simpler form, I would have probably gotten a higher score. I mean, no one can really tell, but I think I might have. And looking back, what I learned was that when I was writing that, no one was judging me on, how perfect my essay was or whether my ideas were so great or so bad. They really just wanted to see, can I organize my thoughts? And can I write clearly using strong evidence to support myself? Strong, detailed examples. So about 3 years after taking the WPE, I was one of those instructors who was reading the WPEs along with other colleagues because I was a grad student at the time, and I also was teaching a timed writing prep course there at Cal State Long Beach. So I was also in on grading these exams, and I learned a lot, and I saw a different side. So these instructors have so many exams to grade that they're really not examining and evaluating every little detail that you write. They want to know that you can hit the main, that you can perform, and the structure of an essay, and you're not all over the place, that you're organized. One thing you might want to do when you're writing or before an essay exam test is to ask if you can bring a dictionary or thesaurus, because when we're writing for a very long time, sometimes over and over again, so it can be helpful to bring a thesaurus or dictionary. Sometimes an instructor won't let you do that, but they may provide one for you. Paragraph structure is really, really important. And this is the way that, this is kind of like a map so that we don't get lost as we're writing on the spot during a timed essay exam. We want to know the structure very clearly. So the structure is this. First, we start the body paragraph off with a topic sentence. So we make a statement or we give a reason why our thesis is true. Or we give a statement supporting our thesis. And then we give a very specific example that shows that the statement is true or that the reason is true. Usually, if you're using a quote, the quote goes here in place of the example. And then after we give an example, we explain why that example is important to what we're saying, or how it shows what our point. And then we close the body paragraph off by linking this paragraph, the main idea in this paragraph, again to the thesis. We look back at the thesis, and it's almost this moment that's like, therefore. Okay, so these are the 4 parts of a body paragraph to keep in mind as you're writing. If you write in this structure, just very, very structured, you won't get lost, and you'll make sure you're hitting all of the points of a paragraph structure. Now, after you're done writing, you want to have pre-planned or preset an intention for maybe two things that you're going to revise and or edit. So revision is the big stuff. It's a higher order concern. This is the bigger stuff. It's a revisioning of what we wrote. So we're we're looking at adding or taking away sentences. We're looking at clarity and organization. We may need to add another paragraph. So it's big stuff, okay? The ideas. Editing, when we edit, we're looking at sentence level stuff. It's the smaller stuff. It's the last thing we're going to do before we hand in the paper. And so you see why it's important to maybe only choose one or two things to focus on, because when it comes to editing, we could get overwhelmed. But if you choose, remember when I said you could find out what your biggest challenge is when it comes to writing. And let's say your biggest challenge in terms of editing is that you use a lot of fragments instead of full sentences. And if that's the case, and that's your number one challenge, if you can pay attention to where all the fragments are inside your essay and eliminate them, you've just boosted your score by a lot, because that was your number one challenge. Okay, so that's all for this this video. And next, when you're ready, you can go on to watching the video on the guidelines for responding to the essay exam question. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or send me a remind text. Otherwise, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you for being here. Talk to you very soon. Bye.